The biting wind carried the acrid stench of industrial waste across Xylo's prime central square. Lyra stood motionless on the execution platform, her luminescent skin patterns dimmed by exhaustion and fear, though she refused to let it show. Her large, expressive eyes, a characteristic of her species, surveyed the hostile crowd with defiance. The consortium guards flanked her, their heavy exo-armor humming with power, weapons trained on her slender form. Overhead, surveillance drones buzzed incessantly, their red scanning beams sweeping across the gathered spectators. Most were consortium workers, miners, processors, and administrative staff who kept the colony functioning. Few showed any emotion. Public executions were common enough on Xylo's Prime that they had become merely another break in the monotony of colonial life. Lyra's wrists ached from the energy cuffs that bound them behind her back. The charges against her had been read in the sterile courtroom hours earlier. Sabotage of critical infrastructure, collusion with rebel forces, theft of consortium property. She had not bothered to defend herself. The verdict had been decided long before she was captured. In the third row of spectators, Cale shifted uncomfortably. His engineer's jumpsuit was worn and stained, bearing the faded insignia of the consortium's technical division. Dark circles underlined his eyes, evidence of too many sleepless nights repairing faulty equipment with insufficient resources. He hadn't planned to attend the execution, but the mandatory announcement had come through while he was fixing a ventilation system nearby. Something about the alien woman's demeanor caught his attention. There was dignity in the way she held herself, refusing to cower despite the certainty of death. It reminded him of his sister in her final days, defiant even as the consortium denied her the medical treatment that would have saved her life, deemed inefficient resource allocation for a low-level technician. The execution officer stepped forward, his voice amplified by the square's speakers. For crimes against the consortium, betrayal of colonial trust, and acts of sabotage threatening the lives of loyal citizens, the defendant has been sentenced to immediate termination. He tapped a command into his wrist console, and a cylindrical device rose from the platform floor beside Lyra. Cale recognized the disintegration chamber. He had performed maintenance on similar models. The process was designed to be painless but complete. Within seconds, molecular bonds would be severed, leaving nothing but basic elements to be recycled. Efficient, economical, quintessentially consortium. But as the chamber began to hum with building energy, something broke inside Cale. Perhaps it was the memory of his sister or the accumulated years of witnessing the consortium's casual cruelty. Or perhaps it was simply the alien woman's eyes, which had momentarily locked with his, revealing an intelligence and fear that transcended species. Without conscious decision, Cale's hand moved to the toolkit at his belt. He extracted a small device, a pulse generator meant for testing circuit breakers. With practiced movements, he modified the settings to maximum output, then hurled it toward the nearby power distribution node that supplied the execution platform. The resulting explosion was small but effective. Sparks cascaded from the node as the square plunged into momentary darkness. Emergency lights flickered on seconds later, casting everything in a bloody red glow as alarms began to wail. In the confusion, Cale vaulted over the barrier, separating spectators from the platform, and sprinted toward Lyra. The guards reacted, but too slowly. The lead officer raised his weapon, but Cale was already at the alien woman's side, tackling her off the platform as the officer's shots sizzled through the air where they had been. They hit the ground hard, Cale absorbing most of the impact. "Follow me if you want to live," he hissed, scrambling to his feet and pulling her up by her bound arms. Without waiting for a response, he dragged her toward the maintenance access door he knew would be unlocked during a power fluctuation. Behind them, chaos erupted as guards shouted commands and spectators scattered. Another energy blast struck the wall inches from Cale's head as he yanked the door open and shoved Lyra through before following himself. The door sealed automatically behind them, buying precious seconds. The maintenance tunnel was dimly lit by emergency strips, stretching ahead in a labyrinth familiar to Cale from years of repair work. Forcing himself to slow down, he examined Lyra's restraints. "Hold still," he muttered, pulling a multi-tool from his pocket. With practiced movements, he located the energy cuff's weak point and disrupted the field. The cuffs deactivated, falling away from her wrists. Lyra rubbed her freed wrists, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight harmonic quality characteristic of her species. "No time," Kale replied, already moving deeper into the tunnel. "They'll override the lockdown on that door in about 30 seconds. We need to be far away by then." To his relief, she followed, moving with a fluid grace that belied the exhaustion evident in her dimmed skin patterns. They navigated through the maintenance network at a brisk pace, Kale leading them through turns and junctions with confidence born of experience. "You know where security cameras are?" Lyra asked, her galactic standard accented but clear. Kale nodded. "Most are disabled during power fluctuations, but emergency protocols will bring the main junction ones back online soon. We need to avoid those." He pointed upward at an approaching camera mount, then gestured to a side passage. "This way." They descended through 3 levels, the industrial drone of machinery growing louder as they approached the facility's processing zone. Twice they had to flatten themselves against walls as security patrols rushed past intersecting corridors. Once, Lyra pulled Kale into a recess he hadn't noticed as a drone silently swept by, its sensors active despite the disruption. "Good eyes," he whispered, impressed by her perception in the dim light. "Different spectrum," she replied tersely, tapping beside one large, iridescent eye. After 20 minutes of evasion, Kale guided them to an abandoned processing chamber. The equipment had been stripped for parts, leaving only the massive, empty shell of industrial machinery. The chamber was cold, with condensation dripping from exposed pipes, but it was off the regular patrol routes. "We should be safe here for a few hours," Kale said, checking the seal on the heavy door behind them. "They'll be focusing searches on the outer perimeters and transport hubs." Lyra sank to the floor, her back against a wall, limbs trembling from the exertion after days of confinement. Her luminescent patterns pulsed weakly, cycling through what Kale recognized as distress indicators. "You're hurt," he observed, approaching cautiously. "Not severely," she replied, examining a burn on her arm where an energy blast had grazed her during their escape. "It will heal." Kale rummaged through his toolkit and extracted a small medkit. "May I?" he asked, holding up a regenerative patch. She hesitated, then extended her arm. As he applied the patch, she studied him intently. "Your consortium. Why help an enemy?" Kale finished securing the patch before answering. "I fix machines for the consortium. That doesn't mean I approve of everything they do." He sat back on his heels. "Why were you really being executed?" Lyra's patterns shifted to a slower, more regular pulse. "They said sabotage, terrorism." A bitter sound escaped her. "The truth? I discovered something I wasn't supposed to know about what they're really mining on the southern continent. Cerulite deposits," Kale said automatically. "For Starship engine components." "No." Lyra's eyes fixed on his. "Xenite. They found a massive vein last year and have been extracting it in secret." Kale's breath caught. Xenite was known to be sacred to several species, including Lyra's people. It formed the core of their ancestral temples, believed to connect them to their gods. More practically, it was also a key component in advanced weapons systems, which explained the consortium's interest in secrecy. "How did you find out?" he asked. "I was cataloging soil samples for agricultural viability. The contamination patterns didn't match official mining operations." She shook her head. "I was curious. Stupid. I asked questions to the wrong people." Next day, security forces raided my lab, planted evidence, and charged me with sabotage. The story rang true to Kale. He had seen the consortium eliminate problems with similar efficiency before. Clean, quick, and buried under paperwork and falsified evidence. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing the inadequacy of the words. "But why were you here? Your people rarely leave the Meridian systems." A shadow passed over Lyra's features. The consortium is relocating my people from our outer colony worlds. For our safety, they claim. In reality, they're clearing us from resource-rich planets. Her patterns darkened. I came as a scientific liaison, hoping to document the violations of our territorial treaty. Kale nodded slowly. It fit with rumored consortium expansion initiatives he'd heard whispered about during officer meetings he'd been called to repair equipment for. We can't stay here long, he said. They'll expand the search perimeter eventually. Where can we go? Lyra asked. The spaceport will be locked down. I have an idea, Kale replied, but we'll need to wait until shift change, when there's more movement throughout the facility. Try to rest. We move in 4 hours. Lyra nodded, her exhaustion evident as she curled against the wall. Kale settled on the opposite side of the chamber, mind racing through possibilities and contingency plans. He had just upended his entire life for a stranger. Yet somehow, watching the gentle pulse of her luminescence as she fell into fitful sleep, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. For hours later, they were moving again. Kale had used the time to access a maintenance terminal, monitoring security deployments and mapping their route. The facility was on high alert, but resources were stretched thin, creating exploitable gaps. They're offering a substantial reward for information leading to our capture, Kale informed Lyra as they navigated through a waste processing tunnel. The acrid smell made his eyes water, but it would mask their scent from the biosensors. You could claim it, Lyra observed, studying his reaction. Return to your life. Kale's laugh was hollow. What life? Fixing machines until I'm too old to be useful, then being retired to a resource reclamation facility? He shook his head. I've been looking for an exit for years. You just accelerated the timeline. They emerged from the waste tunnel into a low-traffic storage area. Kale led them to a service elevator that would take them to the surface level. As the elevator hummed upward, he handed Lyra a maintenance jumpsuit he'd retrieved from a locker. Put this on, he instructed. Keep the hood up. If anyone looks closely, they'll realize you're not human, but from a distance, it might buy us a few seconds. She complied, the oversized garment nearly swallowing her slender frame. What is your plan? Maintenance crews are dispatched to outlying facilities regularly. There's a transport depot 3 sectors from here. If we can reach it without being spotted, we might be able to stow away on an outbound vehicle. The elevator doors opened to a corridor bustling with shift change activity. Kale nodded to another technician who barely glanced their way, too focused on ending their work cycle. They walked purposefully, Kale slightly ahead, Lyra following with her head down. They were halfway to the depot when a security alert blared over the facility's speakers. Attention all personnel. Lockdown protocols in effect. Remain at your stations for identity verification. Security teams are en route to all sectors. Run, Kale whispered, abandoning pretense as they broke into a sprint. Behind them, shouts echoed as security officers began to flood the corridor. An energy blast sizzled past them, striking a wall panel which erupted in sparks. They rounded a corner into a processing bay filled with massive sorting machinery. Workers scattered as they burst in, followed closely by security forces. Kale grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her toward the far side, where raw materials were fed into the complex via a conveyor system. Jump when I do, he shouted over the industrial din. As they reached the conveyor, he leapt onto it, pulling her with him. The belt carried them rapidly toward an opening in the wall that led to the external loading zone. Security officers fired after them, but the moving target and intervening machinery made accurate shots impossible. As they approached the opening, Kale wrapped an arm around Lyra and rolled them both off the belt, dropping into a maintenance crawl space beneath the conveyor exit. They lay still, breathing hard as boots thundered past above them. The security teams continued outside, assuming they had ridden the conveyor to the loading zone. When the sounds faded, Kale nudged Lyra and pointed to a narrow service tunnel branching off from their hiding place. That should lead to the depot, he whispered. But we need to hurry. They'll realize their mistake soon. The tunnel was tight, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through dust and cobwebs. After what seemed an eternity, They reached a grated opening overlooking the transport depot. Vehicles of various sizes were being loaded with supplies and equipment for outlying facilities. There, Cale pointed to a large hauler being prepared for departure. Geological survey team heading to the western ridge. Low security, long journey. He began working the grate loose. Perfect for stowaways. The grate came free, and they dropped down behind a stack of cargo containers. Keeping low, they worked their way toward the hauler, using the bustle of loading activities as cover. When a loader droid turned away to retrieve another container, they slipped aboard, concealing themselves within a compartment meant for equipment storage. The space was cramped, forcing them to press together as the hauler's engines rumbled to life. As the vehicle pulled away from the depot, passing through the facility's outer checkpoints, Cale allowed himself a cautious sigh of relief. "We made it out," he murmured. For now, Lyra's patterns pulsed with what he was beginning to recognize as thoughtfulness. "They will still hunt us," she said. "The consortium doesn't forget traitors." "No," Cale agreed, "but they'll have to find us first." The hauler rumbled over rough terrain for hours. Through a small ventilation gap, they caught glimpses of Xylos Prime's desolate landscape. Strip-mined plains giving way to jagged mountains untouched only because they lacked valuable resources. Occasionally, they heard the survey team members conversing in the cabin ahead, but no one approached their hiding place. Night fell, bringing plummeting temperatures. In the confined space, they huddled together for warmth, awkwardness gradually giving way to necessity. As Lyra drifted into exhausted sleep, her head resting against Cale's shoulder, he found himself studying the delicate patterns that flowed beneath her skin, muted now in sleep, but still faintly luminescent. He had never been this close to one of her kind before. The Vexery, as they called themselves, kept mostly to their own systems, emerging to trade or negotiate only when necessary. Consortium propaganda portrayed them as isolationist and technologically backwards, clinging to superstitions while the rest of the galaxy embraced progress. Yet the woman beside him had been conducting scientific research, spoke multiple languages, and possessed keen observational skills. Another consortium lie, it seemed. Cale must have dozed, for he woke with a start as the hauler ground to a halt. Through the ventilation gap, dawn light illuminated a research outpost nestled in a mountain valley. The survey team was disembarking, unloading equipment. "We need to move," Cale whispered, gently shaking Lyra awake. "They'll check compartments once the team is clear." They slipped from the hauler while the team was occupied setting up their base camp. The outpost was small, a cluster of prefabricated structures surrounded by sensor arrays and atmosphere processors. Beyond it stretched dense, scrubby vegetation leading up into the mountains. "The wilderness extends for hundreds of kilometers in that direction," Cale said, pointing toward the mountain range. "Few patrols. We can lose ourselves there, at least temporarily." They had just reached the edge of the vegetation when shouts erupted from the camp behind them. They had been spotted. Without hesitation, they plunged into the dense growth, pushing through thorny underbrush as energy blasts sizzled through the foliage around them. "This way," Lyra called, suddenly taking the lead. Her eyes, adapted to see into different light spectrums, identified a path invisible to Cale. They ran until their lungs burned, climbing higher into the mountains as the sounds of pursuit gradually faded. By midday, they had put significant distance between themselves and the outpost. They paused at a small stream to drink and assess their situation. "They'll send drones to search," Cale said, examining a cut on his hand from the thorny vegetation. "But this area has high mineral content that interferes with scanners. It's why they need ground teams for surveys." Lyra knelt beside the stream, dipping her fingers into the cool water. "What made you do it?" she asked suddenly. "Back at the execution. You didn't know me. You risked everything." Cale was silent for a long moment. "My sister," he finally said. "Taya. She found irregularities in resource allocation reports, supplies marked for colony development being diverted to military installations. When she reported it, they labeled her a security risk." His voice tightened. They denied her treatment when she developed Hadley's syndrome, said resources were better allocated elsewhere. He picked up a stone, turning it over in his hands. I watched her die, telling myself there was nothing I could do, that the system was too big to fight. He tossed the stone into the stream. When I saw you standing there, I couldn't watch it happen again. Lyra's patterns shifted to a gentle, steady glow, a sign of empathy among her people. I'm sorry about your sister, and grateful for your courage. She hesitated. But what now? We cannot hide in these mountains forever. No, Kale agreed. We need to find a way off-planet. There are anti-consortium groups, smugglers, rebels, displaced colonists. If we can contact them, I might help with that, Lyra said, her patterns brightening with purpose. Before my capture, I made contact with a resistance cell. They have a communications relay somewhere in these mountains. Hope stirred in Kale's chest for the first time in years. Do you know where? Not precisely, but I know how to signal them, if we can find the right materials. They continued their journey deeper into the mountains, foraging for edible plants that Lyra could identify and collecting components for the signaling device she hoped to construct. As days passed, they established a rhythm, working together with increasing efficiency. Kale taught Lyra survival techniques he had learned during his mandatory consortium field training, how to avoid leaving traceable signs of their passage, how to construct shelters from available materials, how to evade drone surveillance patterns. In return, Lyra shared knowledge of her people's advanced understanding of ecological systems and natural medicines. On their 5th night in the wilderness, they sheltered in a small cave as a violent storm lashed the mountainside. Thunder rolled across the valley as rain pounded the landscape, obliterating any tracks they might have left behind. The signal device is nearly complete, Lyra said, working by the light of her own bioluminescence, which she had gradually regained strength to control. I need one more component, a power cell with specific output parameters. The survey outpost might have had something suitable, Kale mused, but going back would be too dangerous. There are old mining operations in these mountains, Lyra replied, abandoned when yields decreased below consortium profit thresholds. They might have left equipment behind. A crack of lightning illuminated the cave entrance, followed immediately by a deafening thunderclap. Lyra flinched, her patterns briefly flaring with alarm. You don't have storms like this on your worlds? Kale asked, attempting to lighten the mood. Our atmospheres are more stable, she replied, her patterns settling. Though the southern peninsula of Vexlar experiences monsoon cycles. She looked up from her work, eyes reflecting the faint light. I miss it, the sound of rain on crystal formations, the scent of Narthwood after a storm. It was the first time she had spoken of home with anything approaching wistfulness. Kale found himself wanting to know more. What else, he asked. What else do you miss? Her patterns shifted to a slow, nostalgic rhythm. The twilight chorus, when all the bioluminescent creatures emerge at dusk. The floating gardens of Meridian City. She paused. My family's ancestral home in the foothills of Mount Vexer, where the Zenite veins run so close to the surface that the entire cliff face glows during the third moon's apex. It sounds beautiful, Kale said softly. It is, or was. Her patterns darkened. The consortium has probably relocated my family by now. Our ancestral sites declared hazardous and restricted. She set aside her work, suddenly too agitated to continue. They take everything sacred and call it progress. Efficiency. Profit. Kale moved closer, hesitantly placing a hand on her shoulder. She tensed momentarily, then relaxed, her patterns slowly calming. We'll find a way to fight back, he promised. Not just escape, but make a difference. She met his gaze, her large eyes searching his face. Why? This isn't your fight. Your people aren't being displaced. The consortium doesn't serve humanity, Kale replied bitterly. It serves profit. Humanity is just another resource to be exploited, some of us more valuable than others based on our utility. He shook his head. They've taken from my people too, just more subtly. The storm continued through the night, but neither of them slept much. Instead, they talked, truly talked, for the first time since their escape. Kale shared stories of his childhood on a consortium agricultural world, where farmers were gradually replaced by automated systems and forced into factory work or relocation. Lyra spoke of her people's history, their deep connection to the worlds they inhabited, and their philosophy of ecological harmony. By morning, when the storm had passed, leaving mist-shrouded mountains in its wake, something had shifted between them. A deeper understanding, a recognition of common purpose despite their different origins. They set out at first light, heading toward a ridge where Lyra believed they might find an abandoned mining operation. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous, forcing them to help each other across narrow ledges and steep inclines. Midday found them standing before the gaping entrance of a defunct mining complex carved into the mountainside. Faded consortium warning signs hung askew from the entrance, partially concealed by encroaching vegetation. Motion sensors? Lyra asked, scanning the entrance warily. Kale shook his head. Unlikely. They typically salvage all security equipment when they decommission a site. Too valuable to leave behind. Nevertheless, he approached cautiously, examining the entrance before gesturing her forward. Seems clear, but stay alert for structural instabilities. The mine's interior was dark, illuminated only by shafts of sunlight penetrating through cracks in the ceiling. Lyra's natural bioluminescence provided additional light as they ventured deeper, picking their way through abandoned equipment and collapsed supports. There, Kale pointed to a control station against the far wall. Emergency power systems might still have functional cells. He approached the station, beginning to dismantle the panel to access the components beneath. Lyra explored nearby, examining discarded tools and containers. Kale, she called suddenly, her voice tight. Look at this. He joined her, staring at the container she had opened. Inside were crystalline formations, xenite in its raw form. The distinctive blue-green crystals pulsed faintly in the presence of Lyra's bioluminescence, responding to her biological energy. They were mining it here too, Kale realized. This wasn't just an ordinary metal extraction operation. This vein must have been too small to be profitable, Lyra said, running her fingers gently over the crystals. But they'll be back when larger deposits are depleted. Kale returned to the control station, working with renewed urgency. After several minutes of careful extraction, he held up a power cell triumphantly. This should work for your signal device. Let's get out of here. They made camp that evening at a sheltered overlook, offering a view of the valley below while providing cover from aerial observation. As night fell, Lyra completed the signal device, a compact arrangement of scavenged components integrated with a fragment of xenite that would amplify the transmission. It's ready, she announced, making final adjustments. The signal will be brief but distinctive. If resistance operatives are monitoring, they'll recognize the vexury communication pattern. She activated the device, which emitted a series of pulses, invisible to human eyes, but, according to Lyra, creating specific patterns across multiple energy spectrums. After several minutes, she deactivated it. Now we wait, she said, and hope. They took turns keeping watch through the night. During Kale's shift, he caught himself repeatedly glancing at Lyra's sleeping form, watching the gentle pulse of her bioluminescence. In sleep, her patterns flowed in natural rhythms, occasionally accelerating into what he suspected were dreams or memories. Morning brought no response to their signal, nor did the following day. They rationed their forage supplies, made one brief excursion to replenish water, and otherwise remained at the overlook, waiting. On the third day, as dusk approached, Lyra suddenly straightened, her patterns flaring with alertness. "Listen," she whispered. At first, Kale heard nothing. Then, faintly, the distinctive hum of an approaching craft. Not the harsh drone of consortium vehicles, but a subtler, modulated sound. "Is it them?" he asked, tension and hope warring within him. "One way to find out," Lyra replied, retrieving the signal device and activating it again. The approaching craft altered course immediately, heading directly toward their position. As it drew closer, Kale could see it was a battered transport vessel of non-consortium design. It hovered above the overlook, then slowly descended to land on a flat area nearby. The craft's hatch opened, and 3 figures emerged, 2 humans and a Sathorian, a reptilian species known for their resistance to consortium expansion. All were armed, their weapons not quite pointed at Kale and Lyra, but ready to be raised at a moment's notice. "Identify yourselves," called one of the humans, a woman with close-cropped gray hair and the bearing of a military veteran. Lyra stepped forward, her patterns shifting to a formal configuration. "I am Lyra of House Vexer, scientific liaison to the Colonial Treaty Commission." She gestured to Kale. "This is Kale, formerly of Consortium Technical Division. We seek asylum and transport off-world." The woman's expression remained impassive. "Why should we trust a Consortium technician?" "He saved my life," Lyra replied simply. "The Consortium condemned me to execution. He intervened at great personal risk." The 3 resistance members exchanged glances. The Sathorian spoke, his sibilant voice carrying clearly. "The execution at Xylos Prime? The one that caused the facility lockdown?" Kale nodded. "That's us. And now we're both wanted fugitives." "Show us your arm," the woman demanded, addressing Kale. He understood immediately. Rolling up his sleeve, he revealed his forearm, free of the subcutaneous consortium loyalty chip that officers would have embedded. The woman studied him a moment longer, then lowered her weapon slightly. "I'm Commander Vega. This is Torek," she nodded to the Sathorian, and Jace. The second human, a young man with burn scars covering one side of his face, gave a curt nod. "We received your signal," Vega continued. "Recognized the Vexery pattern. But we need to be certain you're not part of a consortium trap." She turned to Lyra. "You claim to be a scientific liaison. Prove it." "I was documenting Xenite extraction violations on protected Vexery ancestral sites," Lyra replied. "I have evidence stored in secure data caches, including mining operation coordinates, extraction quantities, and falsified consortium reports." Vega's interest visibly sharpened. "That kind of evidence would be valuable to our cause." "It's yours," Lyra said, "if you help us." The commander considered for a moment, then nodded. "We'll take you to our base for debriefing. After that, we'll decide your status." She gestured toward the craft. "But be warned, if this is a deception, neither of you will leave our facility alive." They boarded the craft, which ascended rapidly and accelerated away from the mountains. Through a viewport, Kale watched the wilderness that had been their refuge dwindle beneath them. Beside him, Lyra's patterns betrayed her tension despite her composed exterior. "It will be all right," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Her patterns rippled in acknowledgement, and she subtly shifted closer to him as the craft carried them toward an uncertain reception. The resistance base was concealed within an extensive cave system, accessible only through a narrow canyon that required precise navigation. As they descended into the hidden valley, Kale glimpsed a surprising level of infrastructure: concealed landing pads, camouflage sensor arrays, and the telltale shimmer of a defensive shield system. Inside the cave complex, the signs of a well-established operation became even more apparent. Diverse species moved with purpose through carved tunnels and chambers, many wearing mismatched equipment salvaged from various sources. Kale counted representatives from at least 6 different worlds, working together with a coordination that impressed him. They were escorted to a secure chamber deep within the complex. Commander Vega instructed them to wait, leaving Jace to guard the entrance while she and Torek departed, presumably to consult with other resistance leaders. "How long have you been fighting the consortium?" Kale asked Jace, attempting to break the suspicious silence. The scarred man regarded him coldly. "Since they decided my mining colony was expendable during a Xenite riot, vented the whole residential section to preserve valuable resources. My family was inside." He touched the burned side of his face. "I only survived because I was in a sealed maintenance shaft when it happened." Kale nodded, understanding the man's hostility. "The consortium declared my sister resource inefficient when she needed medical treatment. Let her die rather than provide care. Something in Jace's expression shifted slightly. Not warmth, but perhaps a fractional reduction in hostility. That's their way. Everything and everyone is just an entry in their profit calculations. Hours passed before Commander Vega returned, accompanied by an older Vexery male whose intricate luminescent patterns marked him as a person of significant status among his people. He studied Lyra intently, communicating briefly in their native language, a complex combination of spoken words and pattern displays. Lyra responded, her patterns shifting through formal configurations before settling into what appeared to be a respectful, static display. The older Vexery turned to Commander Vega and nodded. She is who she claims to be, he stated. Elder Vexer vouches for her identity and intentions. And what of him? Vega asked, indicating Kale. Lyra's patterns pulsed with certainty. He has proven his commitment. Without him, I would be dead and my evidence lost. I stake my honor on his integrity. Elder Vexer studied Kale thoughtfully. The human has defied his own kind to aid one of ours. Such actions carry weight. He turned to Vega. I will accept responsibility for both of them. Vega appeared satisfied with this. Very well. They'll be assigned quarters and given restricted access to common areas. Full clearance will depend on their contributions and behavior. She fixed Kale with a stern gaze. Your technical skills could be valuable if you're truly committed to our cause. The consortium isn't my kind, Kale replied firmly. Not anymore. I'll help however I can. The following days were a process of integration and evaluation. Kale was put to work repairing and upgrading salvaged equipment, his technical expertise quickly proving useful to the Resistance's chronically undersupplied operation. Lyra worked with intelligence analysts, providing detailed information about consortium operations and Vexery territories at risk. They saw each other only briefly during this period, usually in passing within common areas. But each encounter reinforced the connection that had formed during their time in the wilderness. A shared glance, a brief touch of hands, a meal taken together in exhausted silence. Small moments that anchored them amid the strangeness of their new environment. On the 7th day, alarm klaxons shattered the base's routine. Kale abandoned the communications array he'd been modifying and rushed toward the command center, where he knew Lyra would be working. Commander Vega was issuing rapid orders as personnel scrambled to battle stations. On the main display, sensor readings showed multiple consortium vessels approaching the valley. Containment shield and maximum, Vega ordered. Prepare evacuation. Protocols, priority data, and personnel to transports immediately. How did they find us? Jace demanded, rushing in with his weapon already drawn. Unknown, Vega replied tersely. But our outer sensors were compromised 3 hours ago. We assumed mechanical failure. Kale spotted Lyra assisting with data transfer to portable storage units. He moved to her side. What's happening? Consortium Assault Force, she explained, her patterns cycling through urgent configurations. Too large for coincidence. They knew where to look. A sick realization formed in Kale's mind. The signal device. They must have detected the transmission. No, Lyra shook her head. The frequency was... It wasn't the frequency, Kale interrupted. The Xenite. It has unique energy properties. If they were specifically scanning for Xenite energy signatures after your escape. Lyra's patterns flared with dismay. The crystals from the mine. I didn't think. An explosion rocked the cavern, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Vega's voice cut through the chaos. First wave breaching the outer defenses. All non-combat personnel to evacuation points now. Resistance fighters rushed to defensive positions as civilians and support staff hurried toward the back of the complex where transport vessels waited. Kale grabbed Lyra's arm. We need to go, he urged. This is happening because of us. No, she pulled away. It's happening because of the consortium. And I can still help. She indicated the data units she had been working with. These contain evidence of consortium violations on a dozen worlds. They need to reach the Galactic Assembly. Another explosion, closer this time, Through the dust and smoke, Kale could make out consortium combat units entering the main cavern, exchanging fire with resistance defenders. The primary evacuation route is compromised, Torque announced, entering the command center with a bleeding wound on his arm. Consortium forces have deployed at both ends of the valley. The maintenance shaft, Jace suggested urgently. The one that connects to the old mining network. It's too narrow for their combat units. Vega nodded grimly. Begin evacuating through the secondary route. Torque, take a team and hold the main entrance as long as possible. She turned to Lyra and Kale. Elder Vexer is already aboard the command transport. You should join him. What about the data? Lyra asked, indicating the units they hadn't yet transferred. Take what you can carry, Vega ordered. The rest will have to be destroyed. As Lyra gathered the critical data storage units, Kale assisted Jace in preparing demolition charges to collapse the main cavern once their people were clear. The sounds of combat grew closer, punctuated by the distinctive whine of consortium energy weapons. They're advancing too quickly, Jace muttered, setting the final charge. We won't have enough time to get everyone out. A plan began to form in Kale's mind. The environmental systems, he said suddenly. I can overload them, create a cascade failure. The steam release would create cover and delay their advance. Jace looked skeptical, but nodded. Do it. I'll finish here. Kale sprinted to the environmental control station, fingers flying over the interface as he input override commands. Behind him, he heard Lyra calling his name. He turned to see her approaching, data units secured in a satchel across her body. The evacuation is starting, she said urgently. We need to go now. Almost done, Kale replied, finalizing the overload sequence. This will buy everyone more time. He activated the command, and immediately alarms blared as the environmental systems began their catastrophic failure sequence. They rejoined Jace, who was ushering the last resistance fighters toward the evacuation route. 30 seconds until the charges detonate, he warned them. Move! They raced through narrowing tunnels, the sounds of battle partially masked by the hissing of overloaded steam conduits. Ahead, Kale could see resistance members climbing through a narrow vertical shaft that would lead to the secondary evacuation point. A massive explosion shook the entire complex, more powerful than the previous blasts. Kale stumbled, nearly falling as chunks of rock broke loose from the ceiling. Lyra steadied him, her strength surprising as she pulled him forward. That wasn't the demolition charges, Jace shouted over the din. They're using heavy ordnance. They reached the shaft, where Commander Vega was coordinating the evacuation. Hurry, she urged, helping Lyra into the shaft. Our sensors show they're bringing in something big. Might be a bunker buster. Kale was preparing to follow Lyra when another explosion rocked the tunnel, more violent than anything before. Support beams cracked, and the ceiling began to give way directly over the shaft entrance. Without hesitation, Jace shoved Kale forward and lunged for the collapsing supports, bracing them with his body. Go, he shouted, straining against the immense weight. I can't hold it long. Kale scrambled into the shaft, looking back in horror as Jace struggled to maintain the rapidly failing supports. Come on, he called, extending a hand. Jace met his eyes, a grim acceptance visible even through the dust and smoke. Tell them what the consortium did to Saren Colony, he said. Make it mean something. Then, with a final surge of strength, he heaved against the supports, creating just enough space for Vega to dive into the shaft before the ceiling collapsed completely. Kale stared in shock at the rubble that had claimed Jace's life. Vega grabbed his arm, her expression hard, but her eyes reflecting the pain of loss. Keep moving, she ordered. His sacrifice means nothing if we die here too. They climbed upward through the narrow shaft, emerging eventually into an abandoned mining tunnel similar to the one where Kale and Lyra had found the Zenyte crystals. Resistance members were already moving through the tunnel toward a hidden exit. Lyra waited for them, relief washing through her patterns as Kale emerged. She reached for him, but her expression changed to alarm as she looked past him. Where's Jace? He didn't make it, Vegas said tersely. Save both of us. Grief flickered through Lyra's patterns. She had spent more time with Jace than Kale had, working together in the intelligence section. He was a good man, she said softly. One of many the consortium has taken from us, Vega replied. Now move. The transports are waiting. They continued through the mining tunnels until they reached a cleverly concealed exit on the far side of the mountain range. Several small transport vessels waited on a plateau, engines running, already loaded with resistance personnel and critical supplies. Elder Vexer stood beside the command transport, relief evident in his patterns as he spotted Lyra. They exchanged brief communication before he ushered them aboard. As the transport lifted off, Kale looked back through a viewport. In the distance, consortium vessels swarmed around the mountain that had contained the resistance base. Even from this distance, he could see the devastation as repeated energy blasts tore in a mountainside, collapsing the entire cave network. "Where are we going?" he asked Vega, who had taken the pilot's position. "Emergency rendezvous point," she replied, focused on navigating through the treacherous mountain passes at low altitude to avoid detection. Then we split up. Smaller groups are harder to track. "And after that?" Lyra asked, securing the precious data units. "There's a frontier settlement on Bellerophon," Elder Vexer said. "Beyond consortium territory, our people have established a presence there. It will be safe, at least for now." The journey to Bellerophon took weeks, requiring multiple jumps through increasingly remote star systems, switching vessels twice to evade potential tracking. Throughout the journey, the survivors of the resistance base attack gradually dispersed to various safe havens, until only a core group remained aboard the final transport. Commander Vega, Elder Vexer, several key resistance members, and Kale and Lyra. The frontier settlement came into view as their vessel descended through Bellerophon's atmosphere, a stark contrast to the industrial brutalism of consortium colonies. Nestled in a lush valley between towering granite formations, the settlement blended harmoniously with its surroundings. Structures incorporated living vegetation, and solar collection arrays mimicked the natural formations. As they landed, Kale noted the diversity of the welcoming committee. Not just Vexery, but representatives from a dozen different species, all victims of consortium expansion in one form or another. "They've built something remarkable here," Lyra said softly, standing beside him at the viewport. Her patterns flowed with a calm he hadn't seen since their initial meeting. "From necessity," Kale replied. "But yes, it's beautiful." They disembarked into Bellerophon's warm sunlight. The air carried unfamiliar but pleasant scents, flowering plants, clean water, the absence of industrial pollutants. After weeks confined to starship environments, the openness was almost overwhelming. A delegation approached, led by a statuesque Vexery female whose elaborate pattern displays marked her as a community leader. She greeted Elder Vexer with formal gestures, then turned to Commander Vega with a respectful inclination of her head. "The supplies you requested have been prepared," she said, "and accommodations arranged for your people." Her gaze shifted to Lyra and Kale, "including our unexpected guests." "Thank you, Matriarch Selene," Vega replied. "We've brought critical intelligence that must be transmitted to your galactic assembly contacts immediately." "Of course, the communication facility is at your disposal." As the others moved toward the settlement, Matriarch Selene approached Kale directly. "You are the human who saved Lyra of House Vexer," she stated, studying him with unreadable eyes. Kale shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "I just did what seemed right. Few of your kind have demonstrated such perspective regarding our peoples." Her patterns conveyed complex meaning that Kale couldn't fully interpret, but which caused Lyra to straighten beside him. "He is not like other humans," Lyra said firmly. "He has proven his character through actions, not words." The matriarch's patterns shifted to acknowledgement. "So it would seem. You are welcome here, Kale. May you find healing and purpose among us." In the days that followed, they settled into the rhythm of the settlement. The data Lyra had salvaged was transmitted to sympathetic members of the Galactic Assembly, beginning the slow process of building a case against consortium expansion practices. Kale's technical expertise found immediate application in the settlement's sustainability systems, which blended technologies from multiple cultures in sometimes problematic ways. They were assigned adjacent dwellings in a quiet section of the settlement, simple but comfortable structures built into a hillside overlooking a small lake. After the constant tension of their journey, the peace was almost disorienting. On their 10th evening in the settlement, Kale sat on the terrace outside his dwelling, watching twin moons rise over the lake. The night was warm, filled with the sounds of unfamiliar insects and the distant melody of a Vexery community gathering. He heard soft footsteps and turned to see Lyra approaching. Her patterns glowed gently in the twilight, shifting through calm configurations he had come to recognize as contentment. "May I join you?" she asked. "Please." He gestured to the space beside him. She settled next to him, her gaze following his to the moons. "The Assembly representatives have responded," she said after a comfortable silence. "They're opening a formal investigation into the Xenite mining operations." "That's good news," Kale said, "though I doubt the consortium will simply accept the ruling, whatever it may be." "No," she agreed, "but it's a beginning, a chance to build coalition against them." She turned to face him directly. "Commander Vega has asked me to continue working with the Resistance, coordinating between displaced Vexery communities and other affected species." "That seems fitting," Kale nodded. "You're good at bringing people together." Her patterns shifted to a configuration he hadn't seen before, something complex and nuanced. "She asked about you as well. Your technical skills would be valuable to their operations." Kale looked out over the lake, considering. "I've spent my life fixing machines," he said finally. "Maybe it's time I helped fix something larger." He turned to her. "If that's where you'll be, then that's where I want to be too." The admission hung between them, more direct than anything he had said before about his feelings. Lyra's patterns responded, flowing into what he now recognized as the Vexery expression of deep emotional connection. "When you intervened in my execution," she said softly, "I thought you were simply an idealistic fool, one who would not survive the consortium's retribution." Her hand moved to cover his. "I am grateful to have been wrong." The contact sent a pleasant warmth through Kale's arm. He turned his hand to intertwine his fingers with hers. "I had no plan beyond getting you away from that platform," he admitted. "Everything since has been unexpected." "Life often is," she replied, her patterns pulsing gently with what he now recognized as affection. "My people have a saying, 'The path unfolds as we walk it.'" Kale smiled. "I like that." He looked toward the settlement, where lights glowed warmly against the gathering darkness. "I never thought I'd find a home outside consortium territory, or people I'd care about enough to fight for. And yet, here we are," Lyra said, her free hand gesturing to encompass the settlement, the valley, the world beyond. "A new beginning." She leaned against him gently, her luminescence creating a soft glow between them. Above, the twin moons of Bellerophon traced their ancient paths across the star-filled sky. Beyond the frontier world, the vast galaxy continued its eternal dance, filled with danger and opportunity, cruelty and kindness, forces of oppression and sparks of resistance. But in this moment, on a quiet terrace overlooking an alien lake, a human and a Vexery sat together in peaceful companionship, their unlikely bond a testament to the possibilities that exist when courage overcomes fear and compassion triumphs over indifference. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The consortium would continue its relentless expansion. The resistance would plan its next moves. Difficult choices would need to be made, sacrifices accepted, battles fought. But tonight, there was just this. Two souls from different worlds who had saved each other in ways neither had anticipated, finding in one another the strength to face whatever might come next. Kale squeezed Lyra's hand gently, and her patterns responded with a warm, steady glow. No words were needed. The path was unfolding before them, and they would walk it together,